What one thing would I wish I'd known 10 years ago? So, to be fair, I'm going to be quite cheeky with this one because it's not one thing that I'd wish I'd known 10 years ago. To be honest with you, it's actually probably two things.
Hey up and welcome to the strategy sessions. My name is Andy Jarvis. I am the host of the show. And that voice you heard just to start off is Thierry Ngutegure. Thierry wants to break all the rules of the show and answer two things when I only asked for one. But you know what? They're both good, so we'll let him off. And he's great too. He's a data guy. He works for SALT.agency, but he's also a product inventor, a founder. Comes up with all sorts of stuff, some brilliant products, alcohol products, peanut butter products, and one which is interesting. It's bull semen. But the story behind it is incredible, so listen to that. Thierry is also from Bradford, which is where I'm from. City close to my heart, it's my hometown, and we talk about the future and what that holds for it, because I think we both believe the city's best days are in front of it, not behind it. So have a listen to that. Thank you to the guests who've been the Black History Month mini-series, Charisse, Anu, Kevin, Colette, and Thierry to finish. After this, we're going from weekly release back to the normal release. So there's not going to be as many episodes, but it's been fantastic hearing 5 different perspectives of what it's like being black in the UK and in marketing. So enough of me waffling. Let's hear what 2 things Thierry has to talk about.
So the first thing really is that there isn't a singular path. I think that when at this point, what was I like 11 or 12 years old? So you're looking at finishing or talking about your GCSEs. You're probably talking about A levels and where you're probably going to go to university. And I think that we live in a society where at the time it was almost like a conveyor belt. It was like bang, bang, bang. This is your process. This is where you go, fall off the end, get a job, crack on, see you later, stay in your role for 35 years, cash in your pension and everything's hunky dory. I do wish that somebody had told me that I do not have to prescribe to that kind of linear process, that there is 10 ways to get to the same destination. I think that was super important, which, to be fair, I almost kind of stumbled into after that point, which we'll kind of touch on a little bit later. And then the second thing that I was kind of going to do a cop out as well is that, like, people aren't inherently as mean as we first think they are. So what I mean by that is that I think back in the day, we used to have more faith in our communities and the people around us, in the sense of whether it kind of materialized from a sense of kids playing out on the street or whatever that might be, and then we've become to a point where like media kind of drills down on the bad things that are happening in the world, and so then it feels like it's happening all around you, and then that manifests as well. The ripple effects of that is that within your career, you believe people are scary and you don't approach them for help in where you would like to go and the things that you would like. Like right now in my career, there isn't a single person I wouldn't DM and think and say, listen, I think what you're doing is absolutely incredible. Like we should do something one time. And quite literally, it's almost like how we met Andy. Like it was social media and saying, "Hey, I think what you're doing is cool. I think you're a cool person. I think we'd vibe, etc." And then you start on this trajectory of like friendship and career support and everything else. You kind of look after each other. But at that time, it wasn't a thing. To jump into someone's DMs who you believe is doing something incredible way ahead of you to learn what
Yeah.
they've done.
The second point particularly really chimes with me. Well, both points really chime with me, but that second point is something that I love and I love talking about because we live in a world, certainly in the UK at least, where there's this relentless message that people are out to get you. And
Yeah,
sometimes people who, especially people who look different to you and who are not from round here, are
yeah,
out to get you. And generally speaking, I don't believe they are. I'm
yeah,
43 years old. I reckon in my entire life, I think I've met maybe 2 or 3 people who I would call absolute bad bastards, right?
yeah,
I've met people all over the world who will, stop and will put themselves at risk or will take themselves out of their way to help you. And
yeah,
actually, the human spirit is a beautiful thing. And if you just stop and open yourself up to look at it and go, actually just take those shutters down and go, right, people are actually there trying to help you. The number of
yeah,
people who will do something for you is just incredible. It's a huge number of people.
yeah, yeah,
And I love that you've seen that and you've also seen it in your work life as well, that just
Mhm.
ask sometimes and people are like, yeah, okay,
Yeah,
we can do this. So,
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I think most of the mistakes we make are as a byproduct of actually not asking for help. Like, don't get me wrong. Like, I think we live in a culture as well now where like I can't scroll Instagram for 10 seconds without an entrepreneur telling me you have to fail, you must fail in order to succeed. And I totally do agree that you do, but a lot of those failures can be mitigated just by speaking to another human who has encapsulated that failure. The most powerful thing about failing is the ability to turn around and tell somebody behind you, by the way, watch that step. Like that's
Mhm.
really the power of the human race, and that's why we've been able to evolve and overcome diseases and famine, etc. Because we have the ability to turn around and disseminate that information. And so then, if we're not really speaking to each other in any way, whether it be business, society, etc., that is why we always say, "Oh, history repeating itself," because we didn't speak to each other ultimately.
My last take on that then is that you probably need to retrain your Instagram algorithm, because all I get if I start scrolling Instagram is people falling off of things, and
Yeah,
honestly, it brings joy to my
yeah. No
heart.
one told
Sorry, I
them.
said people. It's always men
It's,
falling off of things.
it's, because once again, they don't speak, Andy.
And I was like, if only someone could have predicted this would have happened. It's like everyone
Honest,
predicted it was going to happen except you.
literally nightmare.
Thierry Ngutegure, who broke all the rules this morning by having two answers to the question where it only asked for one answer. So you can see the man is a rebel at heart. Thierry, welcome to the strategy sessions.
Thank you so much for having me. Yes, a rebel at heart is very much what I'll have on my tombstone.
You've got that. Mine's going to say talk to your customers. I think I know who wins this. It's
Yeah.
definitely you. So I'm going to start at the beginning because I want to talk about your rebellious nature, because we share an amazing heritage of being BD kids. If you don't know what a BD kid is, it's Bradford in West
Bradford.
Yorkshire. The place, everyone's like, where's that? And you have to say it's near Leeds, which breaks everybody's heart if you're from Bradford. But you went to school in Bradford. And is that where you got your rebellious streak from?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's really interesting because like Bradford has birthed many a things. So I ran into Chris Kamara the other day. I didn't even know he was a proud Bradfordian as well.
Cammy!
Like, do you know what I mean? Like even Zayn Malik, like, and then we've got me and you. Listen, Bradford is churning the excellence out, realistically, and it's about
Absolutely,
time
right?
to
Yeah.
put some
Gareth
respect.
Gates. Don't forget Gareth Gates.
I'm telling you right now, we're churning excellence out. But yeah, like I love growing up in Bradford. There's an extreme sense of community when it comes to Bradford. There's an extreme sense of like outside of London, it's the first city I've seen that has extreme pride on a postcode. So like even when somebody's like, "Oh, where are you from?" I'm like BD6. I'm like, "Oh yeah, 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 yeah. I know that area." So yeah, it was a beautiful place to grow up, and it's one of those spectacular cities where you are in the city center 1 second, but your house is situated on like lands of like greenery, which is incredible and
Mhm.
and a blessing when you're growing up as a kid, to be able to roam around those kind of areas. And so yeah, rebellious is in its nature because discovery then occurs when you have lots of things to kind of run around in. So yeah, Bradford very much, if not ignited, kept that fire alive for sure.
Yeah. And I think, if you only vaguely know Bradford listening to this podcast, you've probably only heard bad things about the city, right?
Yeah,
It is, look, let's be honest, it's a city that has struggled to find its way in modern society. So, very quick history lesson. It was a massive city during the Industrial Revolution. Wool was
yeah,
its main industry. Lots of mills, some of the most beautiful buildings. I always say from a distance, Bradford's one of the most beautiful cities
yeah,
in the UK, right? You stand on a hillside, you see these amazing mills, these beautiful streets. Looks fantastic. Unfortunately, there is no wool industry in the UK anymore. All the mills have shut down, all the industry disappeared, and Bradford struggled to find its feet since then. But and that's led to some challenges, areas of deprivation. There was a large migration came in at the area, and all sorts of stuff, which has led to different communities and different pockets of things happening.
yeah,
But so that leads to people telling you all the bad things about Bradford. But when you get into Bradford, it's just an amazing city. There is just this energy about the place, which I don't find in many other places. And that sometimes energy is mischanneled. But there is an
yeah.
amazing energy about the place that leads to this sort of fusion and this creation and different things banging into each other, which just causes creativity to happen. And
Yeah.
I love going. I haven't lived in Bradford since the 90s, sadly, but all my family's still there, and I love going back to the place. I
Yeah.
love it. And there's just something. I don't know. Maybe it's in the water, right? I don't know, but it's just a great place to be, isn't it? And it's great. Like, so you tell me
Yeah.
how you think it's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm.
No, I mean, I love it. I mean, I've even bought a house here. Like, it's ultimately where, I kind of see foundations being built, and that's why you see such intergenerational families living here for like
Hmm.
decades upon decades upon decades. It's an incredible staple, and I think the worst thing to happen to Bradford was probably Leeds. Like Leeds has become such a melting pot, a mixing pot of people. It's almost like a Leeds is almost like a small London. Like I'm
Hmm.
obsessed with Leeds just as much as I'm kind of obsessed with Bradford, but I do think that because it's so close, it's had that ripple effect of like, when like Brighton used to be somewhere like people would go to retire, and now it's full of people like me, like little hipsters who go down there. It's like the ripple effect of London has meant that people have a far-reaching
Hmm.
effect. It's almost happened to Bradford in a sense of like because Leeds was so close, people just went to Leeds, and so then almost compounded some of the struggles that it's had. But over the last decade or so, and City of Culture bids and things like that, there's a lot of people really pushing for it to not get back on its legs per se. It's not that down. It starts sprinting again. It was,
Hmm.
it was a world class winner, and that's exactly where we'd all love for it to go again.
Absolutely. And there's lessons though that you take from. We were talking just before we started about sometimes the problems of having too much. We're talking client problems, too much money, perhaps. In that, I
Yeah,
think sometimes money can stifle innovation. And that might sound like a counterintuitive problem, but I once interviewed Professor Robert Winston, the owner of one of the most famous mustaches on British TV.
yeah,
And I talked to him about maybe having more money for research. And he said the same thing. He was like, too much money into research stops you thinking creatively about problems. And I kind of take that approach and roll that back to there's a chance for Bradford, I think, because it doesn't necessarily have all the bells and whistles that everything else has,
yeah,
to then find something different by crashing things together and going, hold on, this is something that could have only ever come from Bradford, and
yeah.
have that real kind of unique home spin on it. And I think that there's something brewing there. I get the feel that like there's a positivity coming back to the place that I haven't felt in probably 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I totally agree. Could not agree more. And you know what? And it might be that we help it get there. So we we might be the things that need to crash together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Watch this space.
Yeah.
But so for this to happen, ideas have to come from out between your ears and into
Yes.
action. And probably out of all the people I've ever met, no one does that and puts ideas into action better than you. We are sometimes polar opposites in this. Like I am criminally an overthinker sometimes when it comes to it's like I have this good idea. I'm going to sit on it for 3.5 years and see if it comes to fruition. And nothing ever happens unless you do something. But you're a
Yeah.
serial product launcher. Would that be a good way of describing you?
Yeah, I'm a serial action taker. And I think it's one of those things where it's like really only kind of took to fruition over the last probably 4 or 5 years to say. Because like as I say, it's difficult to articulate because there was once upon a time as well where I was afraid of talking to people or I didn't want to look wrong. I didn't, and when I looked at adults, so when I looked at adults in my head a decade ago, 30-year-old me, I was like, listen, adults have got their shit together, man. Like, I was thinking, how on earth am I going to get to like 30 years old and you're like, you got a mortgage, you got a house, you got kids running around, you got this, you're balancing this, then you go on holiday, then you got your career and like, you're sort of singing or dancing. And it looked like, obviously from the life that my parents portrayed was obviously very well together and it's a really tight knit family, and I was like, I have a lot of love and respect for my parents, so then I was like, how on earth are they running this ship? This looks nuts. But then when you get closer to that age, you realize that actually it is the greatest spinning play act as anyone has ever seen, and everybody's just trying their best. And it's not
Hmm.
perfect every day. The trend line over decades, it's okay. Do you know what I mean? Like if you can get past if you can, the confidence comes through knowing that you can get through a bad day, and that those days will come. And so then actually, when I realized that it's not perfect, I was like, well, what's stopping me from just doing this kind of thing? Like, if it fails, all right, cool. Like, it is what it is. I like what's the worst thing that could actually happen apart from me over criticizing? Because there's nobody that's going to critique you more than yourself. So I was like, if I like myself, so therefore let's just give it a crack. So yeah.
Let's just and that I a friend of mine, Andy Borthwick. Hello, Andy. He's probably not listening. I talked to him for about, I don't know, maybe 18 months, maybe 2 years before I launched Eximo, including a number of other people as well. And at one point over a beer, Andy, I think, had just had enough and he was like, just fucking do it. And I was like,
Yeah,
yeah, but, and he was like, what is the worst that could happen? And you build up these worst things that could happen. But the reality is, actually, go back to what you said right at the beginning. If we just ask somebody, you work out that the worst that can happen is not all that bad, and the things you'll learn along the way. Like
yeah,
this, sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. I remember someone going, yeah, it's a bit cheesy, but sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. And when you
yeah,
reframe it as that, you're like, actually, you can't ever really lose when you launch something, can you? If you
yeah,
do something different, you're always learning something. Um,
yeah.
so,
Yeah.
products you've launched, peanut butter.
Yes.
That's probably the one that not appeals to me most, but confuses me the most. In that
Yeah.
it feels like a really difficult segment to crack. It feels like a difficult product to make, and it feels like a section that's like you. Tell you what. Let's roll back a step. Tell us about some of the products you've launched, and then we'll talk about peanut butter.
Yeah, so oh god, the very first one I tried to launch and it didn't fall on its bum. I tripped it over. Was I started a videography company. I used to dance like competitively at university, so like hip hop and break dance, and we used to go to different universities and even go abroad and compete and stuff like that. And I realized a niche, so I did a videography, specifically dance videography company back when like YouTube was young. Um, I've done 3 beers with Northern Monk, which is quite cool. A peanut butter. I am looking to launch a handbag rental business, which is quite cool. I sell bull semen. A little bit about that later. Um,
Tasty.
yeah, and then peanut butter, and then I've got one more product coming out this year, which I will keep on the wraps, but is very up our street, Andy, and it's something that post 30, more of us will need in our social lives.
Excellent. Hopefully it's cocoa on a quiet night in, because that's all I feel like
Yes.
I need now. Bull semen we will come back to, but so peanut butter.
Yeah.
Beers, I can kind of get my head around. I know, and maybe it's because I know a little bit about the beer market, having worked in it, and alcohol I can see. But that sort of FMCG product that may need a supermarket shelf space to actually
Yeah.
take off to any particular level just feels like a really brutal space to enter. So, what was the thought process behind Mother Nutter? Is that the brand name?
Yeah,
Yeah.
correct. Yes, mother nut of peanut butter. So with a lot of these types of ideas, I always think that if you don't start, and yes, inevitably something might not work, etc. There is no compounding effect. I believe like ideation and something of success is the compounding effect of try and try again. And
Mhm.
so even with Mother Nutter, like that was a beautiful thing because I'd done the beers and I was trying to launch tequila at the time as well. And so then actually, people around me and saw that trial mentality within me, and so said, "Hey, I have a friend. They're currently running a really successful jam and chutney business, but I think they see it, a corner in the market within the peanut butter industry. Would it be something that you could kind of worlds collide and you create something beautiful there?" What the hell do I know about peanut butter? Like in terms of peanut butter, I go to the gym and I eat peanut butter because it's a healthy way of eating, good fats and high
Is it
protein.
spoon in the jar?
It's everything. Spoon in the jar. I use it to
It's
bake.
underrated. People who
It
don't
is.
put a spoon in the jar, I'm telling you.
I'm telling you, it is the one. I put my hand in the jar if there's none left as well. Like I'm an absolute fiend for it. Yeah, literally. And so then it sounds really bizarre, but it's really not. And it's just taking the career that I kind of have within marketing and me being a consumer and merging those worlds together. So people thought peanut butter was weird, but it's not really because it's not even that saturated. It's actually quite a boring market. So what I mean by that is when you go and buy peanut butter, the typical experience is you'll stand in front of a shelf and there is no brand loyalty. You'll go and you say, I love crunchy. Okay, that's like £1.50. Cool. And it's almost price driven by that point. And it's a convenience product. And it's
Mhm.
something that you kind of inherit from your parents as a brand in terms of like, oh, my parents always had this in the jar, or a partner or a housemate or whoever. There's never really somebody who almost like instinctively makes a decision unless you are either like a vegan following a specific diet, and so therefore have had to look for other sources of high like protein and good fats and things like that, and so therefore you are kind of really looking at your diet in general. But the average consumer, really, it's a thing that they stumble past when they're passing bread and go, oh yeah, I need that. Like, oh, I should probably get that. That's signifies health. And so there's a real opportunity in the market there to therefore create a brand that actually had a voice and an opinion and was cool, and do almost like what liquid death has done to water, where rock stars don't want to be seen on stage with Evian bottle. That's not very rock and roll. But if you've got a can that signifies who they are as an individual, and no one can see that they're drinking water, you can have water and still look very rock and roll. So then similarly with peanut butter as well, like, can we create a brand that allows people to signify something to them and to their partners and to their friends as soon as they get it out and be like, oh my God, have you seen Mother Nut? Or, oh, this is a certain brand that I have, etc. And it creates that kind of community aspect. And if it gets picked up by supermarkets, fantastic. If it doesn't, so be it. It doesn't really matter. With a large proportion of these products that I launch, the ethos I stick to is that, are me and my friends going to use it? Do me and my friends need this product? If they don't, then I will not do it. Simple as that. There's many products I've just not started, or opportunities I've not kind of jump on board. But yeah, if it's to the benefit of my friends and I think I would buy it, then we'll go for it.
So there's something really interesting there, and I know people who have spent any time in a workshop with me might be screaming at the phone right now, going, "You've got to ask the question, Andy, ask the question." One of the things I say all the time to clients is, you are not your customer. And you've got to take yourself. The thing I hear the most in workshops is I think, and usually a hand goes up. And I'm like, let me just stop you there, because in the politest way possible, nobody cares what you think, because you are not the customer, and we need to. So it's interesting to hear that your part of your product launch ideation, I suppose, is that I might be the customer, and there may be more people like me. So in my marketing head, I'm going, does that, though, lead you down a path where you can be blinded to problems or issues with it because you become so invested in it? And that's what I tried to say to people. I was like, you're not the customer. It's like, just take your step back and take a dispassionate look at it, as opposed to being involved in it so much. Is that a problem for you?
Yeah, so I totally agree with that narrative as well. And it's something that I've had to be really careful with, because it's the reason why a few of my earlier ideas kind of flopped as well, because I was a narcissist around the product. As I say, like, I put myself into the middle of that when it was unnecessary. So in terms of like with the peanut butter and this kind of other brands that I'm kind of building at the moment, I see myself as a consumer in terms of the physical product, as opposed to the marketing aspect and the growth of said brand. So do I think this level of this peanut butter is good enough quality for me to be happy to consume? Yes, amazing. And then I'll build a team around the branding, the marketing, etc., who have a complete diverse way of thinking and a way of executing certain things. Because in previous attempts, when I've tried to be like, okay, I know how the marketing's going to look like, I know that I'm going to need this, I know that I'm going to need that, I haven't got a clue, and it fails like almost immediately, just because there is no diversity in thought that I've accounted for there. And what I've also learned is that you can have like if we look at My Protein, for example, both me and my mum shop at My Protein, right? So if they looked at those demographics, they would kind of be like, oh, right, there is a 30 to 55, 60-year-old demographic going on here. Cool. They probably all want health-based products, right? Well, I'll give Thierry, as well as Thierry's mum, 25% off whey protein, right? Whereas actually the intent is vastly different, because I'm going there from a perspective of performance, whereas my mum is going there for like collagen, longevity, right? So the intent is vastly different. And so that's where I'm like, actually, I bring in other people to help me disseminate what that intent is, because in my head I'm like, well, people come to eat peanut butter because they love peanut butter, but it's actually no, it's a great food, for example, to introduce children to when they're going on to solid foods. It's a great thing from a health and performance perspective, as well as longevity, as well as baking, as well as I cannot cover all of those intents. And so then as long as the quality is good, I introduce a team to kind of help me disseminate that intent.
So to throw a hand grenade at you,
Yeah.
you come up with products that you want to be the consumer of. Beers with Northern Monk, tequilas, peanut butter. Okay.
Oh God.
How the hell did you get to bull semen then? Right? And what do you do in the evenings and weekends? I mean, is this part of some sort of weightlifting thing? Are you kind
Yes,
of
has
taking
anyone ever had?
shots
Yeah.
of bull semen and just like taurine? And
All I'm saying
what's
is,
good?
anyone that's ever drank a Red Bull, you know what I'm talking
Mm-hmm,
about.
mm-hmm.
Yeah, no. Although the protein intake is very high, I assume it's
It's the
not my
texture
point.
that's the problem.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely not for me. I'm all right. Um, but that is like when you start things serially, you spot patterns quite easily. So I think that product launches and starting business or building things like that is actually more so pattern recognition. So I have the ability to spot, okay, this thing will happen. Okay, knock on effect, 5 steps. I can predict this thing will go on. And so then with being able to monetize an idea, which is ultimately really what I kind of do for a living, you spot certain patterns that thing can occur quite quickly and spot markets and things like that quite fast. So like I enjoy attempting to commercialize things. Like I love that. The idea of trying to uh kind of almost like manifest money almost. That's sort of, like that's ultimately what kind of a side hustle is. So long story short, my granddad, we went to go visit him, and traditionally, when you go see kind of an elder, he gifted us with a cow, both me and my sister. And when we came then back home to the UK, we obviously then had to take the upkeep of that cow. It wasn't going to fit in our carry-on on Ryanair, so we had to take care of the upkeep as well as like the vet bills, and it was a financial toll because at that time we were like what 15, 16. My sister was like 12 at that point as well. Like it's a bit intense. So then I kind of started to have a little read around, like, well, what do farmers do with cows? Like, what happens around here, like in bulls and things like that. And then it led down a bit of a dark hole, but there was a lot of ways of like monetizing cattle and things like that. But the quickest, what I was looking for was because I was desperate for cash. I was like, what is the quickest like turnaround for this kind of thing? Because a lot of the stuff is like, let them graze or abbot or is quite final, like finite in
Mm-hmm.
terms of I'm not going to get that cow back. And so I was like, how do I kind of have longevity against this? Now I'd had a bull and my sister was then given a cow. So then I did my homework around it and saw the value of a cow, and I said, right, okay, I will give you 250 quid cash right now if you give me your cow. And my sister was like, absolutely, take it. I ain't got time for that. And so then the transaction occurred. I then called up my granddad and said, "This is what I want to do. We're going to breed the bull and the cow, and then also from a longevity perspective, you can any offspring of that process that produces milk or anything else like that, keep that for your farm. That's almost like a me to you, thank you so much type thing. Any bulls that then come from that procedure, could we then basically start selling their semen because they're quite healthy, it's a great farm,
Mm-hmm.
and so therefore the longevity of that process, the semen is the easiest way to give them a great life as well as kind of reap the rewards from that. And so yeah, built up to about 12 or so cows, 12 to 14 cows, and it did quite well. Yeah,
Excellent. So I'm based in Northern Ireland and did once have a client that was involved in the insemination of cattle. Apparently, massive business within the farming world, and I think
yeah,
this is about. You mentioned diversity of thought. As a city boy, I had no idea about this. Right,
yeah,
I go and ask questions at clients. That's 90% of my job is asking questions and listening.
yeah,
And I was just like, oh, this is big business, right? Isn't it?
yeah.
You do all right. Oh, okay. And it was incredible, this world that exists outside of the city that is there. So, and is the bull semen business still going?
So I have sold a proportion of those cows, but yeah, it's something that my family still kind of run and benefit from over in Rwanda as well, which is quite nice.
Brilliant, brilliant. So, okay, so but it's not a product you use personally, which is good to know.
No.
Um, Excellent. Could have been an awkward end to the podcast, that one. But then you also mentioned something at the beginning of the bull story that about pattern recognition,
Yeah.
which kind of segues us nicely into your day job, for want of a better description. So you are your data is your day job, right?
Yeah.
And so tell us firstly, what is it you do with data? So you work for an agency, SALT.agency. You've worked at a
Yes.
couple of agencies. What do you look? What do you do with data? You don't just sit there surrounded by spreadsheets going, I have all the data. What do you do?
Yeah.
What are you looking for?
Yeah, so like even it's pretty much spot on there. Like I think that my title is interesting because it's the best current fit for the understanding of what we do at this moment in time. I think it will evolve and change as we start to have a larger vocabulary around data. I think AI will do a large proportion, will help us to do that. In the emergence of something that powerful allows tangents to occur. But ultimately, although it's data, my job is twofold: is understanding people and then telling those stories. That's flat out what it actually is, regardless of what it is that I'm reading. I think at the moment it's just because, as I say, our vocabulary isn't large enough for us to break down specific types of data and truly understand that on a commercial level. But yeah, so my job is ultimately, at the moment in time, we live in a world where we know more about ourselves and humanity than we ever have done before. We collect more data than has ever existed. And so therefore you'd think the natural correlation would be that if I collect a lot about you, I understand a lot about you. But that is just far from it. It's almost like the more we collect, the more confused we're getting about each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so then my job is to ultimately sit between those teams. So the people collecting and the people trying to understand. And I sit between those teams and I help bridge that level of communication. So it's not a case of saying, yes, I have 100% of data and I need to understand 100% of it. 5% of it might only be pivotal to your business or your brand or what it is that you're trying to do. So hyper focus on that 5% because it matters right now. But obviously in the long term, that it's great to keep an eye on that, on the rest of that 95%. But yeah, that is my job, to kind of the strategic application of data into creativity in some way.
I love the bit you said about the more data we collect, the less we seem to know about people, and that's
Yeah.
been a bane of my existence for a decade, I think now. In that I've always skewed towards qual research rather than quant. I've always found
Yeah.
it more useful, and I think that's partly because I hated SPSS at uni, so that
Yeah.
going into data just felt like something I didn't ever want to do. But more than that, I felt I always refer to quant as black and white and qual as color. Not that
Mm.
no one's better; they just do different things. And I
Yeah.
think I always found the stories and the texture and the nuance to what people said much more interesting, and it was something I could play around with and see the patterns in. Whereas
Mm.
looking at numbers and spreadsheets, I always felt like I was kind of just looking at a magic eye puzzle and could never quite step far
Yeah.
enough away from it to see the
Yeah.
thing. Um, but I think but I do have a realization that you need both together. So the fact that you're taking data and trying to tell stories with it and bridging that gap, I love that. I love it.
Yeah.
Have you got any examples you can share with us of where that's maybe come to fruition? Obviously, you don't need to mention client names or anything like that, but where there's been a knotty problem that the data's helped sort of shape the solution to.
Yeah, I mean, even the stuff that I've talked about when it comes like our earlier one, so without having to step into like any accidentally name any brands knowing me, but like even though the example that we're using for my protein earlier when we were talking about intent, right? Like we got to a point where like there's only so much whey protein you can keep pushing, keep pushing, keep pushing. It's like, well, how do we talk to more people about the same product? And so then that is ultimately my job, to come in and go, okay, brilliant. So at the moment, who you've typically been selling whey protein to is this audience. The people who have the ability to consume your product are this much. And then within that is exactly what you're talking about. I'm trying to understand, right, of those groups, what is similar about them and makes them different to other groups as well. And then understanding those groups and what their intents are. So what is it that they want? What are their psychographics? Is there a different in, like, are they more price elastic, for example? So then should we be sending Thierry's mum at 25% and Thierry 15% because we know Thierry will convert at that point. Is Thierry's motivation actually something completely different? So does he want to know when he is looking at the product, does he drop down on the product details? And so therefore he wants to understand the nutritional information versus Thierry's mum, who maybe comes from Facebook, bounces onto our website, is like, I'm already pretty much sold. I've absorbed the content on that perspective. So she just buys it because her and her friends talk about it. Like what on that customer journey, what makes them similar, but also what makes them distinct and different to other groups? And how can we then understand that story and carve an experience that kind of helps them. So it might be product bundles from that perspective. It might be the way you surface your content. It might even be the influencers that you use and the surface to those individuals. Channel execution as well. Like if I want to get Thierry, I would get him on Instagram and TikTok. Whereas if I want to get Thierry's mum, you would be getting her on Facebook and other kind of mediums that way. And so then it completely shapes the way that this is the thing. Like why communicating data is like so powerful if listened to, because it has the ability to tell you the possibilities and avenues you could go down when you're in a moment of like not even struggle, when you have the tried and tested method has come to almost an end in a way of like, okay, we've done it too much, oversaturated, or it's getting expensive. And it has the ability to be like, okay, well, there are these other avenues. And also, like, super important, like you said as well, like sometimes creativity is born from the fact that you don't have a full budget. Because, yeah, you could just be like, well, if I want to get more, I don't need to think about segmentation because I'll just put more money in. And it's like, well, actually, no. If you put less money in and you're a little bit more strategically like creative in the way that you talk to these people, there's probably more longevity in that conversation than there is at just dashing more money.
We can call it the Timu approach to marketing of just buy market share by pouring billions into blitzing everybody with ads. I'm worried that I've actually said the word Timu in a podcast now, and I'll be targeted even more. But to roll back a step, the great advertising guy Dave Trott used the phrase, said every number tells a story. And that's how you have to look at data, is that every number tells a story and it's our job to try and tell it. And I think what you're talking about there is this new sort of data role. My big frustration with data roles for the probably last decade, maybe even more, is that my one criticism is they're always backwards looking. So if you're looking at data, you're only ever standing where you are now and looking backwards. And people then go, oh yeah, but we've got all this data from Facebook, all this data from Google. And I said, yeah, that tells us what has happened. It doesn't tell us what is going to happen. Or we can predict. Yeah. But the skills weren't there. The skills were there for analysing what was there in the past. Yeah. But I think what you're talking about now is standing at that bridge and saying, so now we have that, now we can look at what's going to happen in the future. Yeah. And there'll be data people listening and going, oh no, we've always been doing that. I think they always have, but I'm not sure they've been doing it with correct depth and nuance and understanding. And actually all they've been doing is saying, this is the pattern that we had in the past, so this is what we'll have in the future. I think what you're saying is, this is the pattern that we've had in the past. Now we can shape the future based on that, which is a slightly different thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I've worked with like some change behavior brands as well, where it's like, knowing how people perceive and act around smoking, how do we therefore change a behavior? So like, I have no historic data on how that change behavior will look like. I just know how they previously behaved, and now I need to kind of cultivate a way of kind of changing their mind and the cultural and psychological principles around that as well. I think that those data skills have always existed. Let's be realistic. Like, data people have always kind of been like at the forefront of that type of innovation in terms of collection, etc. I think where we fall down is a dissemination of information correctly to individuals to help them do that. I think that I've come across a lot of people who kind of sit high and mighty when it comes to data, and a large proportion of their role is actually saying, "I told you so." And it's like, that's fantastic, mate. You have the key to
as soon as you're saying that, I've got three names just gone bang, bang, bang straight into my head. I was like, oh yeah, I know that guy. I know that guy. And I know that guy as well.
Yeah. And they hold the keys to the kingdom, and their job is to say, I told you so. And actually where the superpower kind of comes into its own is if you have the ability to find somebody who has the ability to collect said behavior aspects or information that you need, and then has a unique ability of giving that to people who are maybe not so data literate and they just
Mhm.
want to understand the story that is being told and how it matches with their own story or narrative or how it doesn't match. And help them understand that. So instead of saying, okay, brilliant, I'm just gonna create a dashboard that everybody can go on and self-serve and look at the data themselves. And it's like, that's fantastic, but we're assuming a level of data literacy across an organization of completely, vastly different people from all walks of life and completely different kind of skill sets, because ultimately not everybody comes into it with a level of data literacy that you're trying to apply to them. And so you're like, well, obviously it's that. But no, it's not obvious at all. And the fact that you've even said it's obvious just goes to show, how weak your level of communication is against your own work. And you're actually stifling your own growth at that point, because unfortunately in business, you're only as powerful as what you're able to tell and leverage and help other people understand. Because regardless of holding the keys to the kingdom, I truly believe that all business is about relationships. So if I can help you help yourself, I therefore help me. And so there is a data and a people problem occurring there. That kind of goes hand in hand.
And I think when you spend a lot of time, I feel lucky that I spend a lot of time dipping between companies and organizations. And you see, I never go into a company and see a lack of smart people. I don't go into a company and see people who don't know how to do the job or see people who don't want to do the job. Yeah, God, look, there's always someone who's just, taking the money and hoping they don't get found out. But going back to
Yeah.
what we said right at the beginning about the human spirit, 99% of people are in work wanting to do something different. They've got the smarts for it, they've got the desire to do it, but there's often these processes around them that stop it from
Yeah.
happening. There's often these work-based, whether it's tribes, whether it's silos or whatever, that stop people getting the information they need in a way they need it to be able to do the thing they want to do. And
Yeah.
I think if we could just harness how people work better, it's not more data we need, it's more of people being able to work together that we need. That
Yeah.
seems to be the problem that we need to solve.
Yeah, no, I do totally agree. I think that you are right in the sense of there is like a people and a process problem per se. So a process in the way of the way we work, kind of getting in the way of the way we kind of communicate the work that we do to other people and why it's important, and so therefore, or even why it's not important. Therefore, we should focus on your thing, for example. And then yes, there is a people problem from a perspective of like even the way that we measure people's performance is very much like, even if you look at like how like an all hands meeting goes or an end of month, it's like, oh, and now it's the data team, what have you done? And now it's to this team, what have you done? And so then even the way we talk about it like that is very much, it forces me to be insular and create those kind of data silos within organizations. And then next thing you know, you've all got different audiences you're actually talking about. The process and the journey for the customer is completely fragmented, and yeah, you don't even know who you're actually physically focusing on. I think that a really easy like step one I've seen in quite a lot of organizations is, sounds like the simple. I think we do actually need to go back to the kind of simplest things. Like that step one is the best performing teams I've seen in terms of the way they disseminate data across a company has been teams that quite literally sit next to each other. It sounds really silly, but if I sit next to my finance team, I immediately understand why I should not be costing my proposals in that way, because it is therefore not profitable, and or you're going to be overworking or over servicing, etc. Immediately. If I sit next to the our social team, they kind of are like, oh, we've got to put this content schedule or calendar together. We are kind of drying up with ideas. We're not sure where to go. I go, oh, amazing. Well, actually, if we take our SEO data in terms of the way people search and look at that from a seasonal perspective, 12-month, then people actually buy cyclically. So therefore, in terms of ideas, we should be focusing on this form of ideas in order for us to land for Q1. And therefore, as a buying team, we should be focusing on this because these are products that have been outperformed. Like, we start having these conversations that would have never really occurred if all I do is create a dashboard and go, at all, please read this stat and do it as you with. Like, and also
We've
then,
got Power BI, the world's much better.
yeah,
And you're like, yay!
right? And then we're quite narcissistic when it comes to numbers as well. Like, if I find a number that aligns with my bias, I'll use it. So therefore, if you're just sending out dashboards to people, they're like, oh, 20% on this. amazing, boom, bang, put it on my deck, amazing. So therefore, 20% of people do this, and it's like, actually, what is the nuance within that 20%? Why? How have we got to that 20%? Is that 20% as much of a failure as it is a success? Like, what has led us down this kind of garden path instead of just taking a number and kind of using it for our own kind of narcissistic tendencies?
Yeah, and look, the number of times people are under pressure and building a deck or writing a report and just need that one number to support the thing that they've said, and now they're on the hook for it, so they have to
Yeah,
make.
yeah,
We've all written those reports, right? We have all written those reports, yeah, me
yeah.
included. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Mhm.
But to move away from people then and back to the tech for maybe one last question, you mentioned AI very early on in the conversation about how it might change data. Is that in terms of collection, processing, understanding of what sort of impact is it going to have? Do you think?
Yeah, so I think it's going to have this leaning effect of the storytelling aspect. So I think that where uh, it's going to be the most powerful is I do not believe AI, like for a very short amount of jobs, yes. Like if you ever watch Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, I think his granddad like lost his job to the mechanical arm that puts the toothpaste screws on. Like yes, a large proportion of quite a manual task like that, it will ultimately take the job. But what it does for everything that something like that takes, so for every robotic arm that put a chair into a Toyota vehicle, there was an engineer, there was a software developer, there was a quality assurance officer. Like it creates a lot of other jobs in order for that thing to happen. But what it did was then create mass production of vehicles, so we could do that. So if we think about it from a vehicle perspective, it's a great way of putting it, right? So all the parts that go into the vehicle are going to become faster for us to do. So data processing, collecting, mining, cleaning, etc., standardization, certain types of like analysis were like extreme regression at this point, right? So that all of that can be done at now quite a speed. Amazing. But what it's going to take, just like the car factory line, is it's going to take a lot of quality assurance individuals to make sure that the level of quality of data and the things that we are creating are up to a certain standard. And then there is right at the start as well, like the people who conceptualize that piece of research in terms of understanding. Okay, this is the thing that we need to create in order to understand humanity better. And then there's the people at the end who kind of tell that story. So yes, we could produce 50 billion cars, but how do we tell people that they need this car, that it is, it is incredible, vital necessity to their lives, and actually tell families that it's NCAP Safety 5 or whatever that might be. Like, how do we tell those stories? So I think it's going to create a lot more jobs around the dissemination of what it is that we've physically created, as opposed to wasting the time creating the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so then this is where I think it needs to become like what we can all do in terms of AI is not try to be like, oh my god, I'm going to have to start figuring out how do I build my own LLM. No, no.
No.
Realistically, it's
Yeah.
how do I tell the story a little bit better regards the output of that the LLM
Mhm.
has, or how do I leverage it to be able to speed up a lot of the manual processes that I possibly don't like about my job, but the end result allows me to tell a more compelling narrative, and to help us understand each other a little bit more. I think
Yeah.
that's where uh, the greatest growth is going to kind of occur.
Mhm. No, I love that. And it's a bit like when something new happens, we always think of how we can use it in exactly the same way as we do now. And I
Mm.
use this Disney example. If you ever watch early Disney films, and by early I mean like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs early,
Yeah,
um, it's effectively a theatre production done by painting and drawing cartoons. Even the way like the switches between scenes, the curtain comes in and then it
yeah,
switches to the next scene. Why is that? Well, talkies, silent movies were a thing, which were effectively stage shows there with no talking. But Snow White was shot the 30s, was it? I think late 30s. Talkies movies with talking in were only started 4 years earlier, and then they were doing animation. So the only frame of reference they had was theatre shows. This was a movie theatre. It was just a theatre with a different output.
yeah,
You look at Toy Story. That is not theatre that is being animated. But when you first launch, it's part of the same line, right? It's the end of the same line that started there. And we are at the minute of doing Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs with AI. We're just doing what we know, but we're not, but something new. It's like, but what's the Toy Story version of this? How do we do that? How
Yeah,
do we get there? So it's a really interesting time to be in that world, I imagine, and
yeah.
there's plenty of opportunity with it.
Yeah, there definitely is. And I was reading a really good book actually. I've got it here with me actually. It's called Scary Smart. And this
Hmm.
was by a incredible author. He was a former chief business officer for Google, Mo Gauda. He's probably more famously known for like his happiness equation. So he talks about like how do we achieve, yeah,
Yeah, that's where I'd heard that. I was like, I know that name. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, super, super smart dude. And he in Scary Smart kind of talks about the future of artificial intelligence. I read this actually a couple of years ago. But the way he kind of articulates how AI or how our fear of AI is going to kind of drive certain behaviors, he's kind of in the camp of we can't stop it. It's ultimately coming. That's it. It's as simple as that. Now, what AI ultimately does is it will start to understand if we give it a task, it will do the most efficient work in order to be able to execute that kind of work for us. And it at what point do we believe like what do we conceive as consciousness? Because at some point it will have the ability to almost like think and feel in a sense of certain things, right? Depending on the information we kind of give it and it derives from us. And so then it's actually becomes a human problem rather than a tech problem once again, where it's like if this thing is completing or doing things based on how we think, how it thinks we will behave or think and feel about it, then the way we behave is of vital importance. So the way we behave on social media or the way we interact with AI, the way we kind of move around and maneuver around our kind of like financial climate is very it will have a trickle down effect onto how AI will therefore be able to kind of maximize our life for us. Because it could come to a point where there's like two dystopias, right? So there is like one where it's like the Matrix, we are being farmed for electricity because AI has realized these people are a danger to themselves and the entire planet. Please put them in an egg and just harvest them for electricity, and we'll live forever as machines. Fantastic. Then there is the other kind of like utopia of like actually, humanity at its core is absolutely fundamentally positive for the existence of the earth and themselves. And they are incredible creatures. They're just sometimes misled. And the things that are the pressures that help mislead them are like healthcare, financial stability, etc. Okay, brilliant. Well, as machines, if we can create a world where there is no disease and nobody really needs money because there is ample of everything and people can have access to things, then actually humanity is super positive and an incredible thing to have around. And so then it's really, really interesting for us to be able to think that far ahead, because at the moment what we're talking about is very tactical things. Like it's very like, how do I use AI to increase my ROI, right? Whereas like super tactical today type stuff. Whereas his conversation is very much like, what's the future of humanity in the face of artificial intelligence?
Any book that forces you to think differently is always worth reading, right? So I'm a fan of that
it's so
already.
cool.
I've got a note of it. So. Excellent. Well, listen, it feels like it's gone really quickly with a little tech issue in the middle, but that's okay. So it feels like it went really quickly. But Thierry, thank you very much for your time. It's been brilliant to have you on. I will put your contact details and everything in the show notes, if that's all right, to get in touch. And we will all sit with bated breath, waiting to see what the next product of the
It's gonna be good.
production
I
line
promise.
is.
It's gonna be good. It's gonna be a banger.
I cannot wait for this one. I cannot wait.
Thank you so much.
Thierry Ngutegure, thank you very much for your time. See you again.
It's been my pleasure. Take care.